This is my 1983 Toyota A86 and it is my JDM dream car. However, as you can probably tell by the lack of an engine in it, it is not currently in dream status. Now, I imported this car about a year and a half ago, but I only really drove it 100 miles before I ran into some issues. Needless to say, I bought somebody else's project car. Now, there's two main issues with this car. One is the lack of an engine in here. You'll see that on the table in the back. And two is because of this rat's nest of a wiring harness that somebody put together. Now, anybody who knows anything about the A86 knows that it came with a 4AG motor originally. Now, when I was looking through auction listings in Japan, the reason that this one stuck out to me wasn't just that it already had the Tofu spec, but it was also already swapped with a 20-valve Blacktop 4AG. This was a version of the 4AG found in later models, I think specifically the AE111 Corolla. It was actually in a front-wheel drive application there. Now this swap is nothing revolutionary. It happens all the time on 8.6. There's a lot of newer generations of the 4AG all the way up to the Blacktop. But unfortunately, like any car with an engine swap, it was a project car and it wasn't done perfectly. I'll admit I did not get the car inspected as thoroughly as I should have, and that's entirely on me. So while the motor is out and I'm waiting for pistons to come in so that I can start building that, I figure I might as well tackle the wiring harness. Now before we look at what I'm putting in today, let's take a look at what's coming out. This is the crap shot of a swapped wiring harness that is in here now. You could say we could work with this, but I'm going to say we're not going to. And to be specific, this harness is just pretty much for the engine and ECU. This cable you see coming through the firewall here goes back inside to the ECU in particular. The tricky bit here is that there are some bits that are connected to the body harness. Like this connector here is what goes on to the cowl wiring harness, and that feeds into a lot of the body harness that you see going around the side of the car and coming to, well, this mess over here. Needless to say, a lot of the electrical in here is pretty bad, and I'm going to be trying to fix up as much of it today as I can. There's also a lot of changes to the body harness here. I don't think they were made necessarily for the engine swap as much as they were just for extras like this CB competition system that I'm pretty sure is what powers the headlights. Yeah, I don't think I need to explain that this is kind of just a hodgepodge of wiring no matter where you go. In a perfect world, I'd be replacing pretty much all of this, but I have limited time and resources, so we're just going to fix what we can for now and see what we can do. For our new harness, let's take a look at what we got here. This is a standalone harness for a Link ECU. This is made by Man & Racing Products, or MRP. This will not solve my body harness issues, but hopefully this will solve the engine management side of things. Now the great thing about this kit is that it is a plug-and-play kit, meaning it's designed to have everything I need already. The downside is that if it doesn't happen to have everything I need, these are my instructions, which isn't to say it's nothing, but it's not a whole lot. So with that out of the way, let's get to tearing out the old harness. Now obviously most of what's in the engine bay is already gone, but I'm going to start by removing this washer reservoir, which I think is still hooked up somewhere. There we go. And it's leaking water everywhere because it's still full. Oh, there we go. Guess we're just going to hold it upside down from now on. I'll put that in my sink to drain out because I don't know what kind of water is in there. And next, let's remove this wiper motor so that I have easier access to the grommet, which this whole harness goes through. Alright, how does this come off? According to the forums, there's a ball joint that should pop off very easily here. And I don't know where that ball joint is, and nothing is popping off easily so far. Unless I'm just supposed to take off. Oh, there it is. I had to move the wipers up to get to it. And there you go. And with that, I think it's time to start working inside the car. And coming inside the car here, we just need to get rid of a few bolts. Nice and simple. And that whole cover comes out. And now we got access to the ECU, which also needs to come out. Actually, before I take that out entirely, I should undo these plugs. This whole monstrosity is tied into the same harness. To get the ECU out, there is one more bolt further up in here. I'll need to remove the glove box to get to that. I'm not too concerned about that right now. I kind of want to know what this is all attached to and what I need to get out of here. As I unplugged the ECU, I noticed something strange. There were two plugs that were on the engine ECU harness that would come out with that whole harness, but then there was a third plug that stayed on the body. This was fine, but that third plug had free wires that also went to the engine ECU harness. So in order to be able to pull that whole harness out, I'd have to cut these wires. I didn't know what they were or where they went, but at this point I just made note of them so that I could figure it out later, and if I needed to, I could reattach them. Alrighty, let's see if that worked. It's coming. Alright, that was easy. Alright, that's all pulled out of there. Oh yeah, 1A86 engine harness for a Blacktop. Now just to take a quick look at what we got here on the ECU end, I'm pretty sure that these are the connectors for a standard ECU, but we're going to have to do some investigation to figure that out. I had to cut 3 wires. I got this green wire, a black, and a red. I was mostly curious because there was a green, black, and a red on the outside here, but I don't see where that goes exactly. We're definitely going to have to do some investigating on this, but for now, let's just go look at what we got instead. The new harness is nicely labeled, so I don't really have to play what's what with it. Map, ECT, which I'm guessing is engine temperature for the ECU. I won't go through everything here, I just want to point out that it's nicely labeled. And then additionally on the ECU side of things, we've got some relays and some fuses, and then all of our main ECU plugs. Alright, so I did some work off camera last night and did a bit of digging, both literally in the car and also on the internet looking for wiring diagrams. Let me show you what I found. Welcome to my nightmare. There's a lot going on in here and none of it looks fun, and that's because none of it is fun. Now, I have a lot of questions like, what is this orange thing that looks kind of like a fuse box but not really, and why is there this other ECU connector here coming off of the body harness? What's that for? Why is the infotainment wiring harness so much worse than anything I would have done 5 years ago? I mean, all right, so the biggest goal right now is that there's all this speaker wire in here. It's running through here to the speakers in the back, but in order to access everything in the back, let's come over here and just pop the... As you can see, I have amassed quite a collection of parts here that are in the way. So we're gonna have to move all this out of the car, and that's why I freed up the other garage spot. With the rear hatch empty, it was time to start removing the rear speakers. The wiring was run all the way through the door sill and through the quarter trim panels, so I had to take apart basically the entire rear interior. Although luckily, this is a 1980s Toyota Corolla, so that's not nearly as hard as it would be in a modern car like my dad's BMW. As a matter of fact, the hardest part was realizing how to pull up on the rear seat correctly to get it to come out. I did have to remove the front passenger seat so that I could get full access to the door sill. The speaker wire was zip tied at multiple locations to some of the main wiring, so I didn't want to just try to pull it through. However, once I had everything, it was as simple as just pulling all the wires through and getting rid of everything I didn't want. This gives me a headache. By the way, also last night I took out my ECU. This is the old one. It's Freedom ECU. And if you don't know what that is, you're not missing out on much. Alright, with the bulk of the speakering wire out of the way, I need to find where this green wire and this black and red wire go, because I cut those out of the car. You see differently spliced wire colors like this in the harness, or why I can't just assume that the same color goes to the same place on both ends of the harness. Alright, the last time I was on camera, I was trying to find 3 wires in particular and to where they went. Now I did find out exactly where all 3 of those wires go, but then that led me down a whole nother rabbit hole as to realizing the scope of what it is I'm trying to do here. So let me explain a little bit. You see, on the new harness, this whole side is kind of already taken care of. I don't really need to worry about what's here. What I do need to worry about is what's on this end. This goes to my ECU. These are just some relays and fuses, and then these are the 3 that I'm actually going to have to wire into the car accordingly. I've been given the other 3 ends to these connectors, but I still have to make the splices where they need to go. And this pinout diagram here is going to help me do that because it says exactly which pin goes to what, but the hard part is knowing exactly what these inputs are on the car side of things. For example, I need to wire up the oil pressure and temperature gauge. I need to wire up the reverse switch. All these things are easy in theory, but the problem is I don't know which wires are which under my dash, and it's already been tampered with by the previous people who made this harness right here. Now, I mentioned those 3 wires I was looking for. I was a little confused because at the end of this rat's nest, we have some ECU connectors plus this other body connector here that I guess does the same work of going between the body and the ECU harness. But I was a little confused about the other connector that's still in the car that also went to the ECU. Now the wires I was looking for were a red, green, black. You might think that that's power and ground and something else. No, the red wire is power specifically for VVTi, the green wire is for the tachometer, and the black wire that I don't care to look through all this right now to find was for the idle speed control valve, the ISCV. Now this finally made the click in my brain as to asking, why aren't those wires present on the other harness, or are they, and how am I supposed to hook that up accordingly? The answer is, it's complicated, and I have a lot to figure out. Again, the reason it's complicated is not because I wasn't provided enough in terms of the wiring harness I ordered. The reason it's complicated is that this was already swapped with a 20 valve, and this hodgepodge of wiring, don't even get me started on it, it's not documented in any way, so I don't really know what wire goes where. Likewise, the wires that it goes to under the dash have also already been spliced into and changed color in various places, so I can't necessarily trust OEM wiring schematics. Now, the trouble lies in connectors that run between this harness and the body harness that are not present on my new harness, or that are present in different places. Namely, there's this C plug here that goes along the firewall. This has the tachometer signal, and I'm guessing some power wires for things that I have not traced back yet. In other words, I have this connector on this harness, but not on the new harness, and I need to find out what exactly is on this harness and if I'm missing anything when I swap to this harness. These are the perils of going standalone. You have to figure out all of the OEM stuff, figure out what you're going to, and in my case, find out what somebody else already did in the meantime. Then additionally, there's some not so little things that I have to figure out, like the tachometer. The old ECU had a pinout on here for the tachometer, and that's one of the wires that I found. The new ECU does not have a pinout for the tachometer. What it does have, and what it seems I'm supposed to do, is it has the ignition signal outputs that go to the coils, and it seems like I'm supposed to splice into one of those, probably cylinder 1, and pull the signal from there, run it to a relay, and run that to the back of my tachometer. At least so I hope. I have no clue if that's correct or not, I just read it on a forum. So all of this is going to be a little bit more complicated than I thought, because in addition to just hooking up the basic things on the engine side of the new harness, I'm going to have to sort through this whole harness here and trace back certain wires to find out what they are and whether or not they're important or already taken care of or not on the new harness. Now, with all that said, I got all the crappy speaker wiring out of the car already, and I think that everything looks OEM in the rear. I didn't see any wires spliced back there. The wiring looks old and original, so I'm just going to assume that everything back there is fine, and for now put my rear interior back together so that I can clean up the mess behind the camera and have a parking spot in the garage back. Now, with the challenge that lies ahead of me for the wiring harness, this probably is not going to get done in time for me to put a video out on the full thing, but to be fair, even if it did, I don't have an engine to test it on, so nobody's crying there. That said, I am glad that I'm tackling this now and not when I have an engine ready to put in, because I'm realizing just how many things I'm going to have to do to get this harness and the electrical in the car working correctly. Now, with all that said, I didn't even try to bag and tag everything in this interior, and I'm probably going to forget how to put it all back together if I don't do it in the same day, so time to get to work. Alright, it's been a few days, I've had some time to do some research and work on things, let me show you what I got. First things first, let's review what we're after. We need these wiper and washer controls, we need battery and ignition switch, and then we need most of these things here, except I'm a little unsure on some of them, so we'll get to that in a minute. I did find some really helpful resources on the Club 4AG forums. I got some ECU pinouts specifically for the Freedom ECU on the 20 valve package. That's pretty golden actually, I wasn't expecting to find that. Furthermore, what I didn't realize is that the Freedom ECU is basically the same as a 84 to 85 ECU for a 16 valve, except it just has 5 of the unused pins used for new features that are on the Blacktop that aren't necessarily on the older 4AGs. Now coming back to this, I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking at here in terms of what I needed to hook up to the car, but now I have a better idea. This, as best as I can tell, we basically just need two sources for the battery. That's just going to be our positive wire. We need a ignition switched battery source as well for this this pin out here. This guy is pretty simple. I'll show you in a sec. We basically have all these wires ready. We just need to hook them up accordingly. This is where it gets a little bit more tricky. Oil pressure is listed down here. Oil pressure to the meter or to the gauge. I'm not sure if we're going to be running that through this pin necessarily or not, because basically they have a sensor plug on here that doesn't match OEM, and I'm probably not going to be using that. But I don't know if the ECU needs to see it or not. I don't think it does, but maybe we'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. For the temperature gauge, again, same deal. This goes to the gauge cluster. Reverse as well, I really don't know if we need that because we already have that on a separate harness. I'll show you in a second. Then the rest is just providing 12 volt ground and another ground for the shielded wires for communications lines. Now, I've spliced out a few sections of harness. You can see the rest of the tangled mess sitting on the floor over here. One key part of it was there was this, I guess, 12 or 13 pin connector. Mainly, all these blue wires are for the wiper and washer, so that's one of the plugs that we need to hook up. These guys are mostly unknown or redundant because they had purposes for the old ECU that are already covered in other parts of our wiring harness, so we don't need those. So that's that one. That's really easy. Then I told you that I was concerned about this guy because it's not on my new harness and it is currently in the engine bay on the firewall. So it's got to have some importance because there's at least 8 connectors in here, and well, I don't know what they go to necessarily, but let me show you what I figured out. So most of what's along here goes to some connectors that are already on the body. I'm pretty sure this is for my AC. I'm not sure if it's for the clutch. These two down here are actually for the reverse switch. I thought that this was on the engine harness, and it is on my new engine harness already, but I'm pretty sure that if I just plug this in already as is, we should have the reverse lights work as normal, hopefully. Then I've got this long yellow wire and this even longer yellow wire, and each one of these has these little single pin connectors on the end of them. And I'm pretty sure this is for the OEM gauges for oil and coolant temperature. So all of these plugs go into that guy there, and that guy usually comes off of the firewall here and sits roughly over here somewhere. I forget how it was held up properly before, if there was a clip that broke off or what. But point being, these are already running to other electrical systems in the car. They're not necessarily a part of the engine harness. But it was all taped into this madness originally, so I couldn't really tell what was just part of this harness here that went to the ECU and what went to other parts of the body. So the whole point of cutting this out and cutting that out was to find what was part of the body harness and what was part of the engine harness. Now that said, I also learned to crimp these guys into place accordingly. You can see I've got my free pins in here already. You can see a little bit of silver on the bottom there. Luckily, these are a lot simpler to do than I thought they were, but I did have trouble getting the right tool. In fact, I don't have the right tool. Basically, the way these work is that you crimp these, you crimp your wire onto here, and then you simply stick these through these slots here. That way it just creates a seal. You get all 6 of them in, and then you put this guy over top to create something like this. And you'd push that down. I don't want to click it into place. But yeah, these are pretty easy to work with. The downside is that I needed a tool for this. And this is what I got from Home Depot because it was the only thing available locally. This is not the correct tool, but it works well enough. It's not perfect, but it works. This is also very much not the correct tool. I bought this recently for some other projects, hoping it would work for this, and it most certainly does not. These are really easy to do, but you do need the right tool for them. That said, there's a bunch of things on here that I don't necessarily need. There's a 5-volt output if I ever need that for 5-volt sensors. There is a CAN low and high, of course, so we can have a CAN bus. There's 2 digital outputs that are unused currently and a auxiliary output as well. Also, for what it's worth, that C connector, I wrote down all the connections on here, everything that they spliced off to so that I knew what it was before. I did have to cut some wires that seemed like they were redundant or going to things that I didn't need anymore. There was one other connector on the car that I was worried about, which is this 14-pin socket that goes to the ECU. It is still in the car, so I was a little confused about whether or not those signals needed to go somewhere in my new harness. Just about every one of these here has an asterisk next to it, meaning it is not required for engine functionality, except for this guy. Yeah, I hope this isn't required. I mean, it says that it's running power to the ECU, which obviously isn't the case on my new ECU. Anyways, I'm gonna get up to wiring all this in and see where we get. Alright, I'm all done for the most part. I have my wiper harness here that goes into the body. All these ends that are bare, I'm gonna just put heat shrink over them for now. These go to the corresponding slots on my new connector. I do have one wire blank, I'll mention that in a second. Then same thing here, I didn't use most of this. I'm really just using my 2 grounds and my 12 volt supply. One of them is a normal ground, and then the other one is the shield ground. So you only want to put your ground for the shield at one end away from the sensor. Now you may be noticing that I have a blank wire here that is for the starter, and then I'm missing a whole bunch here. I mean, I didn't hook up the oil pressure or temperature gauge or reverse. And the reason for that is I already kind of have them. In fact, that whole harness that I've kept over here has most of those things already. I had one thing wrong. I told you earlier that the connector on the end of this black white stripe wire that was spliced to a whole bunch of other crap before, I thought that that was something for my AC, but it's actually the starter wire, or more specifically, the starter solenoid. Then, as I mentioned before, we've also got wires on here for the temperature and oil gauge, and these 2 really crummy leads for the reverse switch. There was tape on there before, I just took it off to see how bad it was. The point being, the only 4 things I'm missing on the other connector right now is starter, the 2 gauges, and reverse. And if I were to run those through the new harness, which there are connectors for on here already, the reverse, I would need to wire up or make a connector for this side, which I do have all the connectors I need over here. I would just have to make something that goes between that adapter and these bare pins. I don't know if there's something better that exists for these, but they came to me bare like that. This is my starter wire here, and I won't go digging for everything, but there is, yeah, here, temp gauge and oil pressure down here. Basically, for those 4, if I wanted to run the wires through this harness in general, all I'd have to do is take that harness there, cut the wires back at the end of the plug here, and then since that sits around here, I'd literally just be running those wires back through that hole there where the whole harness is going to come in and out of in the first place, and then merge them with the wires down in there, and then they just come right back out and go into the engine bay. So it's a little redundant if you already have the harness. Although I imagine it's very helpful if you don't already have the harness. So for now, since I already have it, I'm just going to run it directly off of this plug here. In the future, I probably will run it through that hole in the firewall over there and then have it come back out for the main harness. It'll look a little bit prettier. Obviously, this isn't a very pretty wiring harness to have in the engine bay, and this, well, this looks a lot cleaner. So if that said, all I need to find is a switched ignition source and then run all these guys to battery source, ground these 2 black wires, and we should be good. So there you have it. That's about all I can do for today because I can't really test anything until I have an engine in there to test with. Also, I was given 1 page of instructions that was just a wiring pinout, and I had to translate all that into what's wrong with my car and how do I fix it, so it was a bit more involved than I may have shown on camera. This project is kind of halted for a bit until I get some pistons in, and then I can start the whole machining and cleanup side of things on the engine and get to building that. And then we'll slowly work our way towards having hopefully a somewhat working car. But in the meantime, there's plenty left to do. I gotta get my track car ready for maybe another track day if I can swing it, but the schedule's a little tight right now, so we'll see what can happen. These videos still do take a little while to make, both between the actual filming of the project and between the editing that it comes down to, so if you like these videos, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, comment while you're down there. I love to hear feedback from you guys. No matter what happens, I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.